Elite universities don't avoid risk. They train students to redefine it. This video reveals the hidden mental framework many Harvard University students use to evaluate opportunities, failure, and uncertainty differently from average students. Chapter 1, The Risk Illusion. Most people believe risk means danger. Wrong, risk means uncertainty. Those are not the same thing. Your brain evolved to avoid danger, lions, cliffs, poison. But modern life replaced danger with uncertainty. Starting a business, switching careers, publishing ideas, investing money. None of those will kill you, but your brain treats them like a lion attack. Psychologists call this loss aversion. Research by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed something strange about human behavior. People feel losses twice as strongly as gains. Lose $100 feels terrible. Gain $100 feels good, but not nearly as good as the loss felt bad. Your brain exaggerates risk, which means most people make the same mistake. They optimize for not losing, instead of optimizing for winning. Harvard students are trained differently, especially in places like Harvard Business School. Their first lesson about uncertainty is brutally simple. Avoiding risk is often the riskiest decision because the world rewards exposure, not caution. Think about startups. Most fail. That sounds risky, but what's the alternative? A lifetime of average salary growth. Low upside, guaranteed stagnation. Entrepreneurs understand something economists call expected value. Expected value is simple. Probability times outcome. A 10% chance of earning $10 million. Expected value equals $1 million. But the average person doesn't think like this. They see 10% chance of success, 90% chance of failure, too scary. So they walk away. Harvard students are trained to ask a different question. Not what's the probability, but what's the payoff if it works? Because when upside is huge, even low probability bets become rational. That's the first shift. Stop asking, is it safe? Start asking, is the upside asymmetric? But here's the problem though. Understanding risk intellectually doesn't remove the fear. Your brain still screams, don't do it. Which brings us to the second system. Chapter 2, The Failure Engine. Most people think elite students succeed because they avoid mistakes. Wrong. They succeed because they make more mistakes than everyone else. But they make them strategically. At Harvard, students are constantly pushed into uncomfortable environments. Cold calling in class, debates, startup pitches, case discussions. You walk into class, professor calls your name. No preparation, explain the strategy. Your heart races, everyone watching. You speak anyway. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you sound like an idiot. That's intentional. The teaching system is called the case method. Instead of memorizing theory, students analyze real-world decisions. Companies facing crises. Leaders making impossible choices. Incomplete information. No perfect answer. Every class is basically a simulated risk environment. You must commit to a decision, even when you're uncertain. This trains something psychologists call decision tolerance. The ability to act despite ambiguity. Most people never develop this. They wait for perfect information, which never arrives. Meanwhile, someone else makes the move first. Speed beats certainty. Entrepreneurs know this. Investors know this. Strategists know this. But it gets deeper. Elite students also learn a second rule about failure. Failure must be cheap and frequent. Eric Ries, author of The Lean Startup, calls this rapid experimentation. Instead of one big risky decision, you run many small tests. Launch a prototype, test the market, gather data, adjust, repeat. Each failure costs little, but the information gained compounds. This is exactly how startups operate in ecosystems like Silicon Valley. Dozens of small failures, leading to one massive success. But average people do the opposite. They avoid small failures, which means when they finally act, the stakes are huge, and catastrophic failure becomes possible. Harvard students invert the strategy. Fail early, fail cheaply, fail often. Because each failure reduces uncertainty. Eventually risk collapses. And what looked dangerous becomes obvious. 2 systems down. Hit subscribe before you forget them. 1 more to go. But here's the thing though. Even if you understand asymmetric bets and strategic failure, you can still sabotage yourself. Because the biggest risk isn't external, it's psychological. Chapter 3, The Reputation Trap. Here's the silent force that controls most decisions. Reputation. Most students spend their entire academic life optimizing for one thing. Looking smart, perfect grades. Correct answers, impressive resumes. No visible mistakes. That sounds reasonable, but it creates a dangerous mindset. You start avoiding situations where you might fail publicly. No risky ideas, no controversial opinions, no ambitious experiments, just safe performance. Harvard professors actively attack this mindset because innovation requires something terrifying. The willingness to look wrong. Think about scientific breakthroughs. Most began as unpopular theories. When Albert Einstein proposed relativity, many physicists rejected it. When Charles Darwin published evolution, it triggered outrage. When Steve Jobs insisted people wanted touchscreen phones, experts laughed. Every breakthrough begins as a reputational risk. And if your identity depends on looking competent, you'll never attempt those ideas. Harvard classrooms force students to confront this. Public discussion, constant questioning, contradicting professors, debating peers, you're wrong constantly. And slowly something changes. Embarrassment fades. You stop protecting your image. You start protecting your thinking. Psychologist Carol Dweck calls this the growth mindset. Your intelligence is not fixed. Your competence evolves through challenge, which means mistakes become data, not identity threats. Once that shift happens, risk becomes easier. Because failure no longer damages your self-worth. It simply updates your model of reality. But here's where things get really interesting. Elite thinkers apply one final concept, something economists and investors obsess over. Chapter 4, the asymmetric mindset. In finance, there's a principle called asymmetric risk. Lose little, gain a lot. Investors search obsessively for these opportunities because they distort probability. Example, you invest $1,000 in a startup. Worst case, you lose $1,000. Best case, it becomes worth $10 million. That's asymmetry, limited downside, unlimited upside. Entrepreneurs hunt these opportunities everywhere. Harvard students are trained to see life the same way, not just in finance, but in careers, ideas, projects. Think about writing online. Worst case, nobody reads it. Best case, millions of people see your work. Huge asymmetry. Or starting a podcast. Worst case, you waste some weekends. Best case, it transforms your career. Asymmetric, or learning a rare skill. Worst case, you gain knowledge. Best case, you become extremely valuable. Asymmetric again. Once you understand this principle, risk stops looking dangerous. Because many opportunities have bounded downside, but unbounded upside. Jeff Bezos famously summarized this mindset with a simple rule. If the downside is acceptable, take the bet. Not because it will definitely work, but because the math favors you. Harvard economics students study these probability dynamics constantly. Expected value, game theory, decision science. And over time, their perception of risk changes completely. They stop fearing uncertainty. They start searching for mispriced opportunities, places where reward outweighs perceived risk. But here's the problem, though. Even if you understand asymmetric thinking, most people still hesitate. Why? Because human psychology is wired for stability. Comfort feels safe. Predictability feels rational. But historically, every major breakthrough required stepping into uncertainty. New ideas, new technologies, new industries, all began as risky experiments. Which means the real question isn't, should you take risks? The real question is, which risks are worth taking? Harvard students are trained to answer that question better than most people. Not because they're braver, not because they're smarter, but because they use systems. They evaluate upside, they reduce downside, they test ideas quickly, and they detach their identity from outcomes, which turns risk into something powerful. A tool, but here's the final twist. Even if you master all of this, there's still one mental trap that destroys decision-making. A bias so powerful it ruins careers, businesses, and entire economies. That's why I made the next video breaking down how elite strategists avoid cognitive bias when making high-stakes decisions. Because once you understand that system, you'll start seeing how badly normal thinking fails, and why the people who master it always seem one step ahead.